Good morning. You're very welcome to the Space and Belfast Healthy Cities webinar this morning, Co-Design of the Urban Environment for Future Generations. And this is the first in a number of webinars on the Queen's University Belfast led space project. And you'll hear in detail about the space project, different elements of it, and the impact for where we live as we age and our brain health. You're very welcome, and I'm delighted to have such a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today to introduce the theme of brain health, the urban environment, and how that affects our aging process, and really the impact of where we live on how we age and how well we live. So you are encouraged to participate in the lively discussion that we are going to have this morning. We have a range of speakers from both Queen's University and WHO Europe. And what we hope that you will do is add your comments and questions as the presenters are speaking, and then we will be able to answer those questions and in the panel discussion and the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. The presentations and a recording of this event will be provided following the webinar today, so you'll be able to catch up and follow up on the discussion again. But a really interesting and dynamic set of presentations that you'll have. We are also launching a series of fact sheets and videos that really highlight the emerging findings of the space project and allow you to think how that might be integrated into your role and your work to support the planning and development of city spaces and towns, and also for current aging population, but also generations to come as well. So really, really interesting and innovative discussion that we're going to have today. We are joined by Professor Jeff Green, an expert advisor to WHO Europe and professor in urban policy. Professor Ruth Hunter, leading the space project from Queen's University, and Professor Jennifer McKinley, co-investigator of the space project as well. We'll also hear from Professor AJ McKnight, Queen's University, and then Dr. Yoni Avia Palenthia and Dr. Neve O'Kane. So we're delighted to get going. Thank you again for joining us this morning. I will invite the presenters to introduce themselves and present their slides as we go along. And first we will hear from Professor Jeff Green. You're very welcome. I'm going to share your slides now, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for introducing me to your consortium of academics and policymakers. It's really great. I'm currently Professor Emeritus of Urban Policy at Sheffield Hallam University. You could move on, please. Thank you. When I worked for a short time for WHO in Copenhagen, we were beginning to think about healthy aging in a much more dynamic way. And I was certainly inspired by this report published in 2002. Active Aging, a Policy Framework. It really was quite an inspirational new paradigm. I think when I worked for local authorities, and I've worked for many, particularly Sheffield, older people were considered a responsibility of the social services department. But of course, this new paradigm talked about older people making a contribution to society. So this report was the germinator of age-friendly cities. Next, please. The second report that I was quite inspired by was Aging and Health. This was an innovative 2015 report from WHO. And this highlighted healthy aging, not active aging. So I think we can all relax as older people. We don't have to be busy and beautiful. This was talking about older people as inclusive and diverse in their circumstances, older people not being kind of homogeneous group. We're all different. And really taking the lead from Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum and their capabilities theory, the objective really was enabling people to be and to do what they have reason to value. Next, please. So within those frameworks, we developed what we call the Healthy Aging Task Force. This is a subgroup, if you like, of the European Healthy Cities project, which I think currently consists of 70 to 80 cities across Europe. And we had a membership originally of 10 to 15 people. This diagram here, which figures Belfast quite prominently, 10 member cities of the task force in 2019. You can see the members and the meetings, of which there were 2 a year. But of course, we did homework between the meetings, and that's important. The meetings were good because we got the politicians there, as well as the technicians and experts and healthy city coordinators that specialized in healthy aging. But you have to do the work between the meetings. So 7 of those cities in 2019 remain with us, and we're joined by 9 others. And we're now 16, and that includes Derry, Londonderry, and Barcelona is the largest. Next, please. So the third report that I was inspired by, and I think a lot of politicians were inspired by, was the Global Guide to Age-Friendly Cities and Communities. Well, at that time, the Global Guide to Age-Friendly Cities, Communities was added. So it's comprehensive, it has 8 domains or petals, and the petals essentially are attributes of an ideal city. So just to take 2, for example, transportation and outdoor spaces and buildings. So we're talking, I think, in this seminar very much about what we call the upstream determinants of health and the upstream determinants of healthy aging. Next, please. What we did was to, in our group, cluster them into 3 dimensions. And it's interesting, the word environment. I think as an English colloquial kind of guy, I tended previously to think of environments as somehow physical, but the model really includes social and service environments, the things that wrap around our lives, if you like. And 2 contributions really of supportive environments. One, to contribute to intrinsic capacity, make older people healthier. So over the life course, if you've got a good environment, then you're likely as an older person to be healthier than if you'd lived for your life in a poor environment. So this is about intrinsic capacity, and that concept is developed in the previous report I referred to. Given your health in older age, then supportive environments can increase the function of older people of every health status. They call it functional ability. Next, please. So one of the first tasks really of the Healthy Aging Task Force was to provide a framework for a poster, and this encapsulated almost a city profile. I know from working in local authorities that often a lot of time and effort is put in, resources are demanded, and reports produced. And it is quite soul destroying in some ways if the report just lies on the shelf and doesn't lead to action points. On the other hand, I think to spray action points around your city, we did this, we did this, we did this, can lack sometimes strategic investment. So what this poster does, if you like, is link actions to those 3 clusters of 8 domains. And there you can see on the left-hand side, the demography of the city and the journey, if you like, on the bottom left-hand column with some evaluation on the right. So I think it's always helpful actually to have some kind of framework rather than a series of actions. Next, please. So this was a co-produced handbook for policy action. It was a collaborative project between WHO and the European Commission. It fills a gap with policy actions to secure ideal. It's interesting that the original Global Guide to Age-Friendly Cities mentioned municipalities very little. You need really to action those ideals, and this report helps us do that. And what it did was to synthesize research evidence and evaluations of impact. Next, please. I know we're going to listen to a number of great presentations following me, but I wanted to make the point really, just by this simple example, that there is an interaction between the cluster of the social environment and the physical environment. So this is 2 streets in Italy, or 1 street actually in Italy, in Milan. At the top of the slide, you can see the social interactions across the street. A busy street, a lot of traffic, but how those interactions are very much enhanced by slowing the traffic. So walkable streets increase social contact and improve mental health. So there's an intersection really between the physical and social environments. Next, please. We were concerned that a lot of WHO frameworks, which I think are very helpful, they synthesize academic and scientific research, they make it user-friendly, but probably they don't appreciate the dynamics of how cities work, how they operate, the political structures, how departments interact one and another, the cycle, the budgetary cycle, and so forth. So we pushed this process tool for policymakers and planners. 5 principles for action, 4 quadrants, 20 steps. I recall that we were missing the engage and understand bit with the community action working group. So we then introduced, at the behest of Horsens municipality in Denmark, who tend to major on community participation. So clearly, if you can see the left-hand top column there, you've got participatory assessment, and you've got a working group, you've got an engagement with older people. Moving on, please, Anne. It isn't a linear process. I mean, as a rationalist, I tend to think, well, let's make an assessment of where we are now. Let's think about where we want to be. Let's secure political commitment. Let's produce a strategy. Let's produce then a program and then an action plan. The real world does not work like that. So here you've got an example of the influence of the WHO Healthy Aging Task Force, number 1. That influenced intersectoral partnerships. So just to recall my first contribution, moving away from the social services department to the planning department, if you like, to the housing department, to the transportation authority, an intersectoral partnership, and then the way that influenced the profile, engaging with the community and so forth. And then maybe after all that, getting political leadership, getting the buy-in from politicians. So each city will develop in a particular way, a different way, but it'll have these elements, I think. Next, please. And this is one of my big things, and I think it will come out of the seminar today, evidence to policy, how important it is that somehow we capture the evidence and push it into the policy domain. From my experience of working for 4 local authorities, often I see reports produced with very little evidence to support them. The references at the end are very weak. Engaging with the universities often is quite a costly process, given the way that universities charge these days. Nothing is for free. Nevertheless, I think local authorities could do much more. And here you've got a very nice example of the way in which the GIS mapping system enabled a link between where older people in Udine in Italy lived in the municipality and where the pharmacies were. And it was an interesting issue, really, because left to the market, the pharmacy, which wanted to set up a new outfit, wanted to locate in a prosperous area, which nevertheless had few older people. Using this map, the mayor of Udine, who was very helpful to the Ageing Task Force, used the evidence to relocate a pharmacy. So this was evidence to policy. Moving on now. Our latest product is a co-produced short policy brief. Belfast has been centrally involved in this. You can see the logos of the 12 cities that were engaged. They range from Győr in Hungary, Barcelona, of course, I've mentioned, but also Belfast played a critical role. And in the UK, Newcastle is the other city that is part of the Healthy Ageing Task Force, and Londonderry joined within the last year, and we hope they're going to make a great contribution. You probably can't read the text here, but what we wanted to demonstrate was that though the response to COVID-19 was primarily generated at a national level, often using scientific data provided by WHO, municipalities had a great part to play. They provided city leadership. Particularly, I would highlight trust. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around how do you build a trust in the kind of measures that the national governments want to operate. And we have some great discussions actually about that. Moving on. So my final slide, we want to, as part of our agenda for the next 2 years, update the city poster profiles, certainly move on to embracing civic preparedness for a range of health-related emergencies, and moving on, therefore, perhaps using the experience of the COVID pandemic, but thinking also about earthquakes, humanitarian issues relating to migration, heat waves, and so forth. And finally, a neighbourhood focus. Collaboration, I hope, with Belfast, Barcelona, Vienna, and Udine. We're going to see some great slides and presentations following me. I would like, if possible, that all that great information around neighbourhood, around the connections between the social and the economic and the environmental, permeates, is transformed or transmitted to the cities in our Healthy Ageing Task Force. I'm sure we can do it. I'm sure that those fact sheets would be very helpful to the network, and it would make a real impact. And I know universities, great universities like Queen's, are often concerned about impact. Actually, it's the new regime, isn't it? We've all got to be concerned about the impact of universities on the real life of our communities. And I think we probably have a great opportunity to do this. Next slide, and final one, I think, from me. I just wanted to make the point that the realpolitik. When I go back to the WHO Global Guide to Age-Friendly Cities, this quote is there: cross lights are made for Olympic runners. These are, in UK parlance, zebra crossings. And older people were saying they didn't really have time to do the crossing, and we need more time. And this is backed up, that evidence from the UCL Pedestrian Accessibility Lab suggests actually that time for older people to cross, or disabled people to cross also, isn't great. Why, you might ask, aren't these changes made to allow that to happen? And then you come into conflict with a kind of rather boxed-in understanding of economic performance. The boxed-in understanding of economic performance is that you need cities driven by cars, you need a rush to get to the next work establishment, the commerce of a city depends upon an efficient transportation system. And that can often come into conflict with the kind of issues that we will be raising in this seminar. I often say there are two coalitions in cities. There's the equity coalition, if you like, and there's the growth coalition. And somehow we have to harmonize the two. Final slide, I keep on saying that, is from me. So many thanks to Manfred Huber, who led the Healthy Aging Task Force from WHO for so long, just retired, and Yonji Yon, Technical Officer. And actually a thanks to Stefania Pascut, who is the Healthy City Coordinator in Udine. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a fantastic presentation. I must apologize. I was so keen to get started that I didn't introduce you. And I think you have been such a friend to Belfast and Belfast Healthy Cities over the year. I possibly thought you didn't need an introduction, but as you mentioned, you're a professor of urban policy and you have worked extensively across local authorities in the UK and universities. And we would be most familiar with you in the role as Healthy City Coordinator in Liverpool many years ago, and now closely as a WHO expert advisor on the Healthy Aging Task Force, which Belfast has been a member for many years. And I can echo what you were saying in terms of the effectiveness of that subgroup of the Healthy Cities Network and the range of work that's taken forward, and a real alignment, a really good fit, and a perfect audience both for the Queen's Space Project, but healthy aging work that all cities and all countries are keen to progress. So thank you for that. And indeed the publications that you have been involved in, both the age-friendly cities, that petal that you presented, very apt and continues to shape the work in Belfast for the Age-Friendly Belfast Plan, and also is a healthy city, also an age-friendly city. So always that challenge in terms of, are we doing enough? Are we meeting the needs of the people in the city? And how do we continue to raise that challenge and ensure it's heard? And indeed working across sectors. I really like what you mentioned about that intrinsic capacity and how we enable supportive environments so that people are able to live longer and age well, and not just survive, but thrive as well. The framework is a great way of considering all of those partners in the city, and a really key point that you said, each city is so different. The political makeup, how the responsibility is shared across different organizations or different powers, either regionally or at local government level, and how then we adapt that similar framework and similar challenges to the dynamics of the city. And really, I think we have been a partner with Queen's University in Belfast here for many years. And one of those key things of the partnership and that growing relationship is really the sharing the evidence, and then that translation, that knowledge sharing, and how we can inform how the research is developed as a city. But also one of the key parts of this innovative project, of the Space Project, is looking at the involvement of older people and their voice as a key thread in all aspects of the research. So I think there will definitely be opportunities to continue the relationship in sharing the information and the findings, and a very willing audience in terms of the members of the Healthy Aging Task Force and the European Healthy Cities Network. So thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your presentation. It was fantastic. What I will do is invite you to stay until the end of the webinar and take part in the panel discussion. So if you have any questions or comments for Professor Jeff Green, please add them to the Q&A box or the comments box, the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pick those up at the end. And I hope that you have enjoyed that. Thank you, Jeff. So moving on, I'm going to invite Professor Ruth Hunter, thank you, to her to share your presentation. So Professor Hunter is the principal investigator in the Queen's University-led space project. Ruth Hunter is Professor of Public Health and Planetary Health at the Centre for Public Health in Queen's University, and her work primarily involves investigating how we can improve our urban environment for better population and planetary health. So real key themes in terms of the emphasis on planetary health, climate change, environments, people living longer, and how do we ensure that the environments in which people live are safe and supportive. The SPACE project investigates the impact of urban environments on healthy aging and cognitive health through the novel interactions of multi-omics, lifestyle, behaviour and environmental exposures. And we will hear more about that as we go along. If you are on Twitter and you would like to tweet, you can include @Belfast Healthy in your tweets, @QUB Space, and for Professor Hunter @Ruth_Hunter QUB. Thank you, Ruth.
Great, thanks, Anne, and hopefully you can all hear me okay and see my screen okay. So firstly, thanks Anne for organising this. We really appreciate all the support from Belfast Healthy Cities, and also to Jeff for a fantastic start to the webinar. My name's Ruth Hunter. I'm a Professor of Public Health and Planetary Health in the Centre for Public Health at Queen's. And I lead this project along with Professor Bernadette McGuinness, who's also based in the Centre for Public Health. I'm also a board member of Belfast Healthy Cities, and I've been working with Joan and Aaron and colleagues for many years as part of Belfast Healthy Cities initiative. And also director of the WHO Collaborating Centre for Systems Science and Network Science for Chronic Disease Prevention and Control. So lots of opportunities, Jeff, to link in with age-friendly cities and the work of the task force, which is fantastic. So I'm going to present an overview of the SPACE project, and SPACE stands for Supportive Environments for Physical Activity, Social Activity, Healthy Aging and Cognitive Health. So we have a particular focus on this project on cognitive health. And what I mean by that is essentially a healthy brain. And a healthy brain is one that can perform essentially all mental processes that are collectively known as cognition. So this includes things like the ability to learn new things, intuition, judgment, language, and also memory. And I'd just like to thank our funders. So this project is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council as part of the Healthy Aging Challenge and their programme on social, behavioural and design research. And the particular aspects of environment that we're interested in is in terms of the physical, natural and social environment, and very much the interactions between those. So I'm going to provide an overview of the project, more as a kind of a taster to whet your appetite of things to come in the autumn as we progress with our seminar series along with Belfast Healthy Cities and start to share more and more some of our research findings. Okay. So just to give a bit of context, so this project's particularly focused in Northern Ireland, unlike many other high-income countries, in particular other countries in the UK and also in Ireland. We're facing and have been for some time the societal transformation in terms of very much an ageing population that Jeff set out very nicely. So in the UK, we're projected to see over 19 million of the population by 2050, age 65 and over. And the graph on the right-hand side shows the projections in terms of aging population. So this is particularly those aged 65 and over, and how that number doubles over a 40-year period. And Jeff very nicely set out the implications in terms of health, social, economic and environmental impacts that this transformation incurs. So essentially people are living longer than they ever have before. And Northern Ireland is projected to have one of the largest increases in ageing population, particularly across the UK. And we're seeing some figures that, for example, on average, 18% of people in each of the council areas across Northern Ireland are aged over 65 years and older. And we see headlines such as the one from BBC News back in 2017 from some NISRA statistics in terms of Northern Ireland pensioners set to outnumber the number of children by 2028. And it's estimated that 1 in 3 children born today will reach 100 years old. And as Jeff said, this is one of humanity's greatest triumphs. But there are things that we can do to ensure that our ageing population ages healthily, and things with this environment that we can do to support that. So the space project very much leverages a study called the Nicholas study, which stands for Northern Ireland Cohort for the Longitudinal Study of Ageing, that Professor Frank Key and the Centre for Public Health has led for a number of years. It was launched back in 2013 and is one of the largest public health studies of ageing across Northern Ireland. And very briefly, what it does is, with a random sample of about 8,500 men and women aged 50 years and over across Northern Ireland, it collects lots of data and information around social, economic and biological factors of ageing. So very, very rich data. That data is collected every 2 to 3 years, and then there's a very detailed health assessment every 4 to 5 years. And the graph there on the right hand side just shows the distribution of those who take part in the study. So you can see we cover right across Northern Ireland, and it's got some very specific focus in terms of legacy of the Troubles, other specific aspects around nutrition, eye health, cognition, and also the work that we're doing around the physical, natural and social environment with the space project. Nicola is also part of the Gateway to Global Ageing Data, and what that means is that it's set up in a way to allow international comparisons with a range of other similar longitudinal ageing cohorts that are happening across the world, so including in England and Ireland, but also in the US, India, China, and many other countries across Europe. So very much the main premise of space is that where we live may influence our cognitive health and also our vulnerability to cognitive impairment, particularly as we age. So some of the key fundamental research questions that we're interested in are there specific environmental factors that influence cognitive health? And what are some of the policies and interventions for promoting healthy ageing and cognitive health, particularly for those in some of our poorest communities? So how very much can the research that we're doing impact and support policy and practice? So as Anne said in the introduction, our aim is very much to investigate the impacts and also these pathways, so how these different environmental factors actually impact on brain health and cognitive health. And we do that through the integration of various different data sources that you'll hear in more detail from Jenny and AJ in the next couple of talks. So we're interested particularly in these environmental exposures, as I say, around the physical, natural and social environment, different lifestyle behaviours, and that has a particular focus on physical activity and also social behaviours. And then also multi-omics data, which is very much around the biological responses, or as AJ puts it, under the skin. So through blood samples and data from urine samples, what actual physiological changes are happening in our bodies as a result of these environmental exposures. And AJ will explain more of that in detail. So why are we particularly interested in these different environmental factors? Well, I've just got a couple of headlines here in terms of air pollution and noise pollution, just as 2 examples of some of the environmental exposures. And we can see here, these are very much areas of environmental exposure which are causing increasing issues. and significant issues in terms of their harm to health. So, for example, we know with some of the different air pollutants, and particularly the more fine particulate matter, that there's evidence that it can cross the blood-brain barrier and lead to increased risk of dementia and cognitive impairment. And with noise pollution, we know that increase in noise pollution leads to increased stress and physiological stress, again leading to physiological changes in the body and increased risk of dementia and mild cognitive impairment. But there are things that we can do to reduce these risks through our environment. So things like good quality and access to green, particularly green spaces, but also blue spaces, we know can improve our mental and cognitive health, primarily through increasing physical activity, but also providing a social space and a space for relaxation and restoration to improve mental well-being. And there are also environmental benefits like reducing air pollution and also the temperature in our cities. And then other aspects around particularly urban design, so things like having cities with compact and complex designs can provide good infrastructure for public transport, walking and cycling, and more green space, which we know then can lower levels of air pollution, noise pollution, and increased physical activity levels. And we know there's just strong evidence that links higher levels of physical activity to better health outcomes, particularly around cognitive health and lower cardiovascular disease. So that really just highlights why we're interested in environment and cognitive health. And this framework just very broadly sets out the key pathways that we seek to investigate and why. So over on the left-hand side here, we have these different urban design factors, social environment factors, particularly around issues such as social capital, but also safety from crime. Different urban design byproducts, as I mentioned, air pollution, noise pollution, light pollution, and also temperature. And then we have down here how people move and use those spaces as pathways through to these various physiological changes and stressors in the body that create changes to our brain that then lead to cognitive impairment and increased risk of dementia. So that just sets out the framework as to the theoretical pathways which we're looking to investigate. So this space project is split into a number of different work packages, and this just gives a quick overview of what they largely set out to do. So we very much take a systems science approach to this, and that's really, as Jeff said, we know that it's very much the interaction and the interrelationships between these different physical, natural, and social environment factors that are working to impact on our brain health and cognitive health. So our first piece of work is really to try and understand these different interactions and relationships using some of these system science approaches. And then Jenny McKinley will talk in more detail about some of the work that we're doing in terms of linking all sorts of spatial environmental data to our Nicola aging cohort, and then some of the analysis that we are doing to try and understand the different pathways by which these environmental factors impact on cognitive health. We then have a subsample of participants in the Nicola cohort who have worn a GPS device and accelerometer. So that's a device-based physical activity monitor, and they've worn those for a week. And here we get very fine-grained information in terms of actual exposure to the environment, to do very detailed analysis of actual exposures and cognitive health impact. And then AJ will talk in more detail about this multi-omics approaches and very much these biological responses and physiologically what changes are occurring in the body due to these environmental impacts. And finally, I'll say a little bit about some new work we're doing in terms of using satellite imagery for creating harmonized environmental data, kind of at scale across a number of countries, but also allowing us to layer in additional information, particularly around quality of, in this instance, green space, because we know high quality green space has more health benefits. So I apologize for the messiness and complexity of this slide, and I'm not going to go through it in detail. We'll have a specific webinar in the autumn time focusing on this. But what this does is just showcase a systems map. So in this case, it's a causal loop diagram, which is a specific type of systems map, which shows the interrelationships between these different environmental factors that we're interested in through to cognitive health. So we see here over on the left-hand side in grey some of the different urban design factors. Here in orange are the urban design byproducts. In blue are some of the more social environment factors. And then through over to the right-hand side, we see some of the more physiological pathways by which these different factors then influence, in this case, MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment, and dementia risk. So this is really our kind of theoretical or conceptual framework that's driving our thinking on and our analysis plans, and we'll make this available when it's published and have a more focused webinar on this. And what we do with this is then also layer on some evidence. So we're using this particular software called EpiReviewer to create this interactive evidence gap map. So here we can see down the left-hand side is a range of different outcomes, which have been collapsed into quite broad categories around all dementia, cognitive impairment, and child cognitive measures. And then along the top are these different broad category exposures, and here we have a whole range of different reviews of the literature that have been done around different environmental exposures and cognitive impairment outcomes. And along the bottom here, the key basically shows different levels of quality of the evidence, and the bigger the circles here, basically the more evidence that's available. And what we can do then is expand out these different exposure metrics and get very specific papers and studies that have been done for each of these different types of exposure. And then if we hover over some of these circles, what we get then is the specific papers that have and studies that have been written. And you can filter here by different countries, different population, age groups, and other factors. So this is a tool that we hope will be ready in the autumn time, and we hope that it can very much support policy and practice and those different evidence briefs, etc., by making a whole range of evidence available in quite a usable, interactive, freely available dashboard. So the next piece of work that we do then is link a whole range of spatial environment data to the Nicola cohort that allows us to look both at these joint and then independent contributions of different urban environment factors and exposures to cognitive health. And this just gives an example of some of the different types of data that we're interested in. So things around density, particular housing density and population density, different types of infrastructure and land use. With the natural environment, we're particularly interested in access to green and blue space, but also grey space in particular, with impervious surfaces, transportation, the different urban environment byproducts, and soil geochemistry, which Jenny will talk about in more detail a little later. And we're also interested in climate. So we know that our older population are those who are at most risk of impacts of climate change. So we're linking data around flooding and heat and other climate change data as well. Say AJ will go into more detail around the multi-omics aspect. So this is very much looking at those biological and physiological responses to the urban environment. And the other piece that we're doing then is Professor Bernadette McGuinness leads the Northern Ireland arm of the Harmonised Cognitive Assessment Protocol, the HCAP study, which collects very detailed assessments of cognitive health with 1,000 older adults in the Nicola cohort, and then we have collected 400. With 400 of this sample, we've collected GPS and accelerometer data that allows us to look at this very fine-grained actual environmental exposure data. So here we can start to see an example of, in this case, different types of intensity of physical activity. So the light yellow is sedentary, the orange is light, and the red is moderate to vigorous. So moderate to vigorous being that health enhancing physical activity. And we can start to see where the health enhancing physical activity is actually taking place. And if our older adults, for example, are using our parks and green space. And then this allows us to answer questions around when we integrate the accelerometer and GPS data with our geographic and information systems data. It allows us to answer questions around exposure through time, space, and behaviour using this kind of integrated framework. And then finally, as I said, that the satellite imagery data, what we want to do here is essentially using machine learning and computer vision techniques. Can we identify high quality green space and different quality factors of our green space in Northern Ireland and other countries, and then link that to our Nicola cohort. So I'll just finish with some of our outputs that are more policy practice orientated. So we're very much interested in prevention and the role of the environment in terms of health prevention, and in this case specifically in prevention of dementia and other cognitive impairment. But there's very little in terms of a policy agenda in this area. So if we can address issues around per transport infrastructure, absence of good quality green space, per housing, we know that will have impacts on ageing, health, cognitive decline, create livable communities and environments, and help address the climate crisis as well. So in September, we're running a series of workshops with a whole range of different stakeholders to really come together to have this discussion, to identify how we can combine our different forces across these agendas and deliver a set of policy recommendations supported by a white paper that can then be used to support local action, bring people together to raise awareness of the issues and develop new collaborations, and also provide some practice-oriented outputs around policy briefs and other evidence summaries to really help support work on the ground. And we're doing that, with Involve. And then one of our other outputs that's due to be launched in September, this is working with Gemma McNichol and Rico Santiago from Land and Property Services, is the development of this geo portal. And so this is very much bringing together all sorts of different environmental data that our team have spent a long time pulling together for the Space project, and making that where we can publicly available to support further research on environment and health, but also policy and practice. So you can go into this, interrogate the different data sets. There's very rich metadata, and where we can, and the data is publicly available, be able to download that in various different formats. So just in summary then, this is some of the outputs that we will be having over the autumn time from some of the research aspects in terms of the causal loop diagram and evidence gap map, various research outputs in terms of environment and cognitive health, and then some of these more policy and practice oriented pieces around the geo portal, the white paper, and Yone and Neve will talk a little bit more about some of the videos and fact sheets to help support this work. So I just wanted to finish by saying thank you and thanks again, Anne, for hosting this, and just also to say a big thanks to the team. You'll see on the slide here a wide range of great researchers who are working with us as part of the Space project. So I just want to thank them for all their work as well. So thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Ruth. That was fantastic. I think like everyone else, as you were going along, I had a lot of questions, very interesting, and the questions were, how can we incorporate this in the work that we're doing at different level to as Jeff has mentioned and you've mentioned, bridge that gap between emerging evidence and findings and how to implement that at a practical level. And I think you have done that in terms of the design of the project, both by engaging older adults as a core theme running through, but also the partnership that you clearly have with a range of organisations to take forward. And that the process of how the project will then provide policy recommendations, sources of evidence that we can really get this on the agenda and work going forward to inform it. So thank you. Really topical in terms of the evidence that you have presented, that the population is aging, that most people will live in cities by 2050, and how do we create equal opportunities for all to access green and blue space to be able to live long and healthy lives. So thank you. So please add your questions and your comments for Professor Hunter into the chat, and we'll come to those at the end of the webinar. Next on the agenda, we have Professor Emmy Jane McKnight from Queen's University Belfast, who's going to discuss the interplay between epigenetics and the environment. So AJ's research has focused on molecular factors that influence human disease and promote healthy aging. And she has participated, led, or helped lead the robust discovery of hundreds of loci for rare diseases and complex traits. As a co-investigator of the SPACE project, Professor McKnight is going to take us through her element of the work. Thank you.
So hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today, and as Anne and Ruth has said, I'm really keen to see how we can use a better understanding of our biological insights to help inform the design of where people live and work to maximise their health. Essentially, we know that where people are born, where they live and where they work has a major impact on their health, and Jeff and Ruth very eloquently explained some of those concepts, but we're not very good at understanding why or how this happens. People inherit their DNA from their parents and it's passed down through generations, and we know that there are inherited differences encoded in people's DNA that affect how they respond to their environment. But all of that is fixed at conception, and it doesn't account for changes across the life course, so it's very difficult to change. What we're doing in the SPACE project is using new approaches to help us understand how our different environmental impacts can really get under our skin to influence not only the onset, but also the development and progression of diseases. And we're taking a particular focus on cognitive health. One biological marker that is really of interest to me in particular is epigenetics. And epigenetics is really that communication between what we inherit from our parents and what we experience in our lifestyle. So our diet, our exposure to noise or air pollution levels, for example. So epigenetics is that biological marker that changes in response to people's diet, their lifestyle, and their environmental exposures. We know that increased exposure to noise, air, or soil pollution will lead to epigenetic changes and health complications. But we also know that increased access to green and blue spaces can help protect residents' health. There is a balance between these exposures and health outcomes. Some of the environmental features are risk factors for disease, while others have protective effects. We know that, but it's only by looking at the underlying biology can we really work out the impact of these complex interactions. And what's really, really important is that these biological changes, these epigenetic changes, may be reversible, so that if we can prevent the exposure, or actually if we can implement interventions that mimic protective biological effects, then that has direct health benefits. There's a really complicated map there that shows some of the linkages we're exploring in this project, not intended for you to look at in depth, but more to illustrate the complexity of some of the puzzle that we're trying to untangle. So tying together things like social isolation versus community health, linking mental health to people's ethnicity, to their access to green and blue spaces, to traffic pollution, noise pollution, climate change, smoking, alcohol consumption, tying all of this together to see if we can really pull out a very clear map that says, A, what are the biological markers associated with individual environmental stressors? And B, which of these have the most impact on health outcomes? So the purpose of that is really to inform which environmental features are best incorporated into future designs to maximise the health of our population. We also know that a subset of the population respond differently to environmental features than others. We're really keen to identify these individuals because they're most likely to benefit from targeted interventions to promote healthy ageing. And that is a very short whirlwind tour of the multi-omic component of the SPACE project. So essentially looking to see how those environmental impacts change people's underlying biology to influence disease, and really importantly, what are the priorities for change, and what other options do we have to mitigate or manage the impact of negative environmental exposures. So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions.
There we go. Thank you, AJ. That was fascinating. I think it's something, it's an area that while I see it as really relevant, I have never been able to understand or see how it could be informed within the work. So that was the work that we are doing. So it was really clear that how you're able to simplify such a complex theme into something that is clearly really crucial to how people are living within their city environments, and to have that as a core element of this. I think that's what is one of the things that makes SPACE so innovative, the broad reach of the key partners throughout Queen's University that have come together to really explore the different elements of both the human health, but also the environment in which we live, and how we can understand or shape that, and how that can be a priority within policy and practice going forward. So thank you so much. While that was really a short snippet, it was really fascinating, and I think it will feature in one of the future webinars. So while it has certainly intrigued a lot of us here today, it will be something that we'll be able to learn much more about in the webinars that feature from September. So thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. And as ever, the questions and comments can be added into the Q&A in the comments section. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Professor Jennifer McKinley from Queen's University, also a co-investigator on the SPACE project. Jennifer is Professor in Geography and the Director of the Centre for GIS and Geomatics in Queen's University, and her research seeks to gain a greater understanding of the link between human health, environmental toxins from natural and anthropogenic sources, including air pollution. So thank you, Professor McKinley.
Thank you very much, Anne, and hopefully you can hear me and see my slides. So thank you very much to Jeff and to Ruth and to AJ for those so fascinating and really helpful slides. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of soil, but actually I want to sort of show that soil can tell us so much more in terms of environmental toxins, and even also in terms of atmospheric pollutants and the impact, the potential impact on human health. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be part of the project of SPACE. I'm actually based in geography in the School of Natural and Built Environment, and also then director of the Centre for GIS and Geomatics. And I think as part of this project, we're very keen to link several projects. So we also very keen to hear about the age-friendly cities, and I'm also part of a European project with Belfast City Council, Upsurge, which is really trying to implement nature-based solutions. So again, Ruth and I are keen to really link all of these projects to sort of maximise and cross-fertilise the results from them. So Jeff started with a really, helpful series of slides. So it's not going to be a surprise to you if we know, we think about what's in the environment, and World Health Organization has really done a lot of work in terms of the impact of the environment on health. And in fact, states that 23% of global deaths are linked to the environment, which actually amounts to 12.6 million deaths a year. And we know that that's not the same everywhere, you know, that it affects some countries more than others. But actually, the benefit of Space Project is that we're not just thinking about the physical environment, but we're actually bringing in all of the different aspects in terms of, as well as the social environment and the natural environment and the physical environment together. So the environment means so much more. So actually the impact of that and the number of deaths and percentage of deaths globally will be so much higher than 23%. So what Ruth has set out is some of our work packages, and one of their work packages is the exposure analysis of really integrating all of the different data sets together. This is a busy slide, and I suppose it reflects, you know, the complexity, and these are only parts, these are types of data that we'll bring together, and they're only part of the data sets that we're trying to bring together. But it shows the complexity of what we want to do, but also then the opportunity to learn from that, to see the results of those, to bring those different types of data that Ruth, that AJ, and that I've been doing, and many others, to link them, to interact, and to see the results from that. The slide that I'm showing at the moment, as well as the soil, air, noise pollutants that we know about, and then also the social deprivations, so those social economic deprivation measures that we know, again, where people live does affect their health, potentially in terms of environment, but that is a whole range of different environments. So we bring in those sorts of social deprivation data as well as the environmental data, the soil data, and we have phenomenal soil data for Northern Ireland, for the UK, but also for other countries. So how do we bring those in? We know that there are potentially toxic natural elements in our soils, but also we have the impact of other pollutants, again, from air or traffic pollution. The health data, then, we want to join with that. And in this example, I'm showing renal data, chronic kidney disease data from the UK Renal Registry. Chronic kidney disease, the work that we've done on this has really led to the development of the Space Project. It's one of the projects, the preceding projects. And chronic kidney disease is interesting because, again, it is linked to aging as well as obesity and diabetes and some other factors, but it is increasing worldwide because, again, as Ruth has outlined, we have an increasing aging population. But the other aspect that we need to think about is, you know, that our soils, and especially our urban soils, such as Belfast and many other cities, they have an industrial or a historical legacy of pollution as well that we need to consider. And again, it's going to affect different parts of different cities at different levels. So we have this historical legacy that, again, our soils can actually tell us some information and evidence of this. In Northern Ireland, we know that we have a legacy of shipbuilding from Harland and Wolff. So there's many sources of anthropogenic sources there. But we also have modern day pollutants. We're one of the cities that actually has a city airport. So we have Belfast City Airport. And again, there may be sources of anthropogenic pollutants that will affect our health outcomes as well. If we think about the air and traffic pollution, then as Ruth has alluded to, we know that these very, very fine particles of some of our, they can be geogenic, but these can also be anthropogenic, such as lead, molybdenum, antimony. They can become blood bound, so they can get into our blood, but then they also can then translocate to other organs, such as the kidneys, but also say the liver, and especially for space, that's important, is the brain. So the soils can show evidence of the geogenic, the naturally occurring, but also the anthropogenic. And quite worryingly, we can see this major increase in the world production of molybdenum, and that's linked to brake pads. So our production of cars and even electric cars, we're increasing our source of anthropogenic toxicity, and that we can find the evidence for it in soils. So using our geochemical data or urban soils, then we can use them as a proxy for the availability of toxins, whether that's nephrotoxins or toxins for any type of chronic disease. So in previous work that we've done, the results that we see from this is that we do see this correlation between these potentially anthropogenic toxins such as arsenic and molybdenum with different types and sources of and the data from the chronic kidney disease data. This is chronic kidney disease of unknown etiology as specified from the UK Renal Registry. And that means that there are no other major causes that can be attributed to these people who have now gone on to dialysis or other renal replacement therapy. So the practitioners are looking at environmental causes, and this is a worldwide issue. But for our urban areas, potentially it is linked to things like transport. And if I overlay on the GIS map, you can see on the right, the transport links have been overlain on it. So we do have some evidence to show that the air pollution, the traffic, and even the brake wear admission, so even putting our foot down on the brake does lead to these sources of these heavy metals, which again, we know can get into our body. And I just should say that on the map, the GIS map on the right, you can see that this chronic kidney disease of unknown causes is up to 12 times higher than would be expected for the average population of Belfast. And that's the same for across Northern Ireland. If we actually go a little bit further and bring in the actual air quality data, and in this case, we brought in benzene, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and then the particulate matter, PM10, and then very fine particulate matter, PM2.5. We can integrate this with our other data sets, and that's what we're going to do in space. But we can do it with our soil data set. We can use a number of innovative statistical methods to do that. And what we have found in the past is that we have found this association, in particular with carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and the PM2.5 with renal function in Belfast. And that has implications for space, but for other cities, for other chronic disease, and especially then for cognitive health and brain health. So what we want to do in space, and what we're going to do, is to use this exposure analysis to bring in all of those different types of data sets that Ruth mentioned, using our geospatial data portal, again, as Ruth outlined, to see what are the exposure, elemental exposure factors for our population, our aging population, as they move through a city such as Belfast. And I think the really interesting and exciting thing as part of space, as AJ has just mentioned, we're also going to link it with the Nicola cohort and the epigenetic data and information that we have. So can we actually see how the biological exposure and responses are linked to our environmental exposures? And we have an opportunity within space to do that. And that is really exciting. So finally, I just want to sort of thank our sponsors as a part of our space sponsors, but also then the UK Renal Registry for providing the data for this. And again, just to mention our fantastic team. So that's me. So thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you, Jenny. That was fantastic. Again, fascinating in terms of how you're able to demonstrate the history of our city and how that still continues to affect our health, and those ongoing challenges in terms of promoting active travel or sustainable travel as we move towards electric cars. Is that the option that is best for travel around a small city when you consider the impact of brake pads and heavy metal exposure from that? So a really fascinating and rounded consideration of both the person's health, the environmental factors, and the things that we're not always immediately aware of when you consider what the soil is telling us, what the air pollution levels are telling us, and the effect on Belfast as a city and the significant higher levels compared to other places. It's really, I suppose, as we discussed earlier in the week, the crises that we're now presented with. This is one that we need to take immediate action on, and while there is bills in place and policies that certainly focus on this, it's clear that it should be woven throughout all of the work that we're doing. And I think that the space project is very timely in terms of what we are now addressing and how that can provide recommendations and evidence, and the resources and fact sheets and videos that will be presented now and launched are a really key element of that as well. So thank you, Professor McKinley, and please put comments and questions in the chat, and we'll get to those following the launch of the resources and the videos. So I would like to welcome our final speakers for a joint presentation, Dr. Niamh O'Kane and Dr. Yoni Alvia Palencia. I didn't do your name any justice there, Yoni. So what I look forward to this part is really the innovative resources, the videos and the fact sheets that are now available as part of the SPACE research project to highlight all of the elements that have been considered and will be further considered in the remaining webinars, and how we can understand them further and start to really unpack them and look at them day to day in the work that we're doing. So Dr. Niamh O'Kane is a research fellow and science communication and research impact officer in the Centre for Public Health at Queen's University. She holds a BSc honours in human biology and has completed her PhD in the Centre for Public Health, investigating the use of social media in public health, mass communication and behaviour change. So really key elements in terms of how we understand our public health messages, and also how that can be integrated into this work. Dr. Yoni Alvia Palencia is a research fellow also with Queen's University and working on the SPACE project. She has a background in environmental sciences and public health, and her research is focused on health effects of urban design, transport and related exposures like air pollution and physical activity in cities. So thank you very much, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Anne. Hopefully everyone can see that screen okay. Yes, so as Anne said, me and Yoni are here to talk about our video series and fact sheet series that we're launching today. So the first thing I wanted to address is why create videos or fact sheets in the first place. So across SPACE, we have a work package that's specifically looking at knowledge synthesis and exchange. And we want to look at the best ways that we can communicate our research with the people who are interested in hearing about it. So whilst as a project, obviously, we're planning a number of different outputs, including more academic outputs such as journal articles and attending conferences, we also wanted to explore visual communication for some of our outputs. And really the reasons for this are that, visual communication can be quite effective at capturing people's attention. They're a good way of bringing together a lot of the wonderful work that's being done by our colleagues across SPACE. They can be useful for simplifying and clarifying topics which can be quite complex, and they can potentially enhance memory and recall, particularly among more visual learners. So thus we wanted to create outputs for SPACE that would be in the first instance succinct. So there is a lot of work across SPACE, as I'm sure you've picked up on so far from all the great presentations. So we wanted them to be succinct and short, and we wanted them to be simple. So we didn't want to include a lot of jargon. We wanted visual communications that would be easy for a large number of people to understand. We wanted to have visual outputs that would be shareable for us through our website, through our social media, through we can print them and attend events with them, but also shareable by people who are interested in the work, so that these visual outputs can be shared among your own networks and hopefully increase the reach of our work. And then finally, we wanted our visual outputs also to be sustainable. And by that, I mean, we wanted something that would last beyond the life cycle or the funding cycle of SPACE. So, we can include these outputs in our funders website, and they can be picked up by the likes of Belfast Healthy Cities and some of the organisations that are on this call, so that the torch can be carried beyond the funding cycle of SPACE. So I'm going to hand over to Yoni to talk specifically on the video series.
Thank you, Niamh. So basically, to do the video series, we got our inspiration from a campaign I participated in 2018, which was done by the Barcelona Global Health Institute, or ICE Global. And this campaign was called The Cities We Want, The campaign was mainly focused in 5 key exposures that need to be tackled in order to build healthier cities, which were air pollution, noise, heat, physical activity, and green space. And all the material of this campaign is still available online in the link that you can see in the screen if you're curious about it. But in our case, we wanted to use the Space Project Causal Loop Diagram, or CLD, that Ruth Hunter has shown before in her presentation. And we wanted to use this causal loop diagram as a storyline for the videos. We also wanted to capture the voices of challenges of aging through the Space Healthy Aging Advisory Group. And we wanted to present what the partners and different institutions outside academia can do to overcome those challenges. So, and with all this in mind, we ended up filming 5 different videos, and these 5 different videos basically cover 5 main themes, which were our air and soil pollution, light and noise pollution, green and blue space, urban planning, and planetary health and climate change. And in all those different videos, we covered the 3 voices, the voices from researchers, from members of the Healthy Aging Advisory Group, and from stakeholders. And to better understand everything that I'm talking about, what we are going to do now is that we are going to show you one of the videos as an example. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the video about noise and light pollution.
The Space Project is a collaborative action to investigate the impacts of urban environments on healthy ageing and the cognitive health of diverse individuals and their communities. In this film, we'll be looking at noise pollution and light pollution and how these factors impact our health as we age and what we can do to combat them.
Noise and light pollution in the urban environment can lead to several health problems. Traffic noise is the second largest environmental stressor, aside from air pollution. And in fact, 1 in 5 people in Europe are exposed to high levels of traffic noise. And these high levels are associated with cognitive problems, sleep problems, and cardiovascular problems such as heart attacks. Light pollution is becoming a global health problem. Over 83% of people are exposed to artificial light at night time. And this exposure to artificial light at night is linked with several health problems.
Where I'm particularly involved in the Space Project is that our team is exploring how these environmental variables and things such as light and noise pollution can really get under our skin and affect people's underlying biology. So for example, 2 individuals might equally both have asthma, exactly the same type of asthma that responds to exactly the same type of drug. One person might be affected by high levels of noise pollution, another may not, and that's due to their underlying biology. If we can help understand what's causing that, then we can help tease apart a little bit of how we can help those individuals and either create an intervention or perhaps a therapy.
An important part of the Space Project is our Older Persons Advisory Group. Next you'll hear about some of their insights into how where they live has impacted on their health and some of the solutions that they have to try and support healthy ageing.
It used to be when I looked out of the back of the house upstairs, I could see the stars, and I'm one of these people, I love seeing the moon. But recently, I haven't been able to see as many stars.
When I was looking after the neighbour's dog on a walk, that the dog actually was picking up on the noise, and that made me more aware.
Where I live, there's a street light actually that shines into the bedroom, which I find really off-putting. I don't like light pollution, and I always sleep much better when I'm away somewhere that doesn't have light pollution.
I'm James Hennessy. I'm a director at the Paul Hogarth Company, and we are landscape architects and urban designers. We're very concerned about what we know about the health impacts of pollution. Through design, we can reduce risks and we can mitigate impacts as well. We need to have the facts at our fingertips to be able to explain why these issues are so important. We need to influence decision makers to invest in solutions for these issues.
So on to our fact sheets then. So in terms of our process, we produced the video series first. And we realized that there was an incredible amount of content produced for these video series from our stakeholders and partners from our older persons and our healthy aging advisory group. And we wanted to further distill this information again into more visual outputs in the form of fact sheets. So we also gathered input from the full space team on these. And so as you can tell, there's a lot of different expert areas, and we wanted to make sure everyone had their say. And then we worked with a graphic designer to produce these fact sheets, which I'm about to show you for the first time. So we had 5 videos, as Yoni mentioned, but we actually expanded these out into 7 fact sheets. And this is because we wanted to really focus on the individual environmental exposures that were combined, for example, in that video, which were light and noise pollution. So you can see they're all very thematically cohesive. They follow a very similar format, but they are all sort of standalone individual fact sheets by themselves, which can be shared and hopefully printed at events and things that we would hope to do in the future. Just to show you the light pollution one in a bit more detail. So as you can see, some of the facts and topic overview information that Mike provided in the video is in the fact sheet. You can see our quotes and our inputs from our healthy aging advisory group and our stakeholders. You can see that we provide some sort of insight into what's next or what do we need to know. And finally, always need a take-home message just in case somebody doesn't have time to absorb the rest of it. That's the key thing that they need to take home. So we're very excited about our videos and our fact sheets, and they are officially now live on our Space website. And you can go and explore all 5 of the videos and all 7 of the fact sheets. And we really do hope you enjoy them as much as we enjoyed making them. So just flashing up the contact information for Yone and I, if anyone wants to get in touch. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Niamh. Thank you, Yone. That was fantastic and a really great resource to have, the fact sheets and the videos. And I think they really bring to life all of the presentations that we have heard today have been fantastic, and to have that as an additional resource to go back to and consider and to integrate into the work that we're doing and inform that's amazing. So thank you for those. I would invite all of the panelists to return by putting on your camera and your mic. And we have had some questions into the Q&A box and comments, so we'll take forward those. And if you have any remaining questions, now is your opportunity to add those. So thank you. That has been a fantastic webinar. I think it really demonstrates the range of the work taking place through the SPACE project and all of those elements that come together, which are all on their own, seem quite complex, but have been presented in a really succinct and a way that it gives us an appetite. It really leaves us with questions to say, how do we do this? Because it is so important. The fact that older people and the voice of older people have been woven into the design and the delivery of the research, I think is a real key element of interest, certainly for us as healthy cities, but also right across where there's encouragement for co-design. This takes it beyond a term, but really as a way of working. And then the integration between that consideration of the impact and how you involve partners from the beginning that will be using it and finding it useful. And I think you've really considered all of the elements in terms of the complex systems maps, how they can be then understood and delivered and integrated into the policy agenda. I think the population is aging, and as Jeff mentioned, this is so key for all of the cities as part of the WHO Healthy Cities Network to really consider how do we shape what we're currently doing for the aging population. In Belfast, we have a really key opportunity because we have quite a young population. So while we are able to learn from the experiences of the Nicholas study and the people currently, how we use our urban environment and how the current environment shapes our health, we are at a really opportune stage where we can shape going forward. We can learn from what we know now and implement that into a successful and busy city centre where city centre living is a key priority. And how do we create the conditions that as we age, we are able to benefit from the gifts that we received at conception, AJ, and how that interplays with the environment, and how our makeup is then affected by where we live, and also that inequality issue that we are all challenged with reducing. How do we ensure that there's equal access to green and blue spaces that are good quality, that provide a solace in the city, and create and showcase Belfast across the WHO Europe audience, but beyond as well. So thank you so much for sharing your work. We do have some questions and we've time for questions. What we will go to, I suppose, Jeff, one of the questions that came in for yourself, thank you for your presentation. It was really fascinating. I think it helped to set the scene for the audience and the appetite that's really here for this work. So one of the questions and comments was, in terms of the work that you're leading and advising on as part of WHO Europe, is there a mechanism for transferring evidence and sharing learning that is most effective for cities, or in terms of that knowledge transfer? Is there something that has worked previously that would be ideal for sharing the findings of the SPACE project? I know you presented the PETAL and the framework of age-friendly cities. Is there something that you have found that works well for the cities in the network?
Thank you. I think it's work in progress. I don't have a definitive answer. I do think, however, that the panelists, the SPACE project, really can give us some clues on this. I mean, I was so impressed really by the scientific powerhouse that is Queen's and this SPACE project, but also the way in which via Ione, they really want to make an impact. And I think the fact sheets and the videos and so on will be very helpful to the 16 now members of the Healthy Aging Task Force. I suppose it's always an issue in the past. When I look at WHO documents, and you know this, they're very long, very complicated. They are robust, I agree they are. So I think I very much take the succinct, simple, shareable and sustainable note that was mentioned, Naomi, I think. If you looked at my slide on the COVID-19 lessons learned from 12 European cities, 2 pages. And when we had a discussion in Udine a couple of weeks ago, people were saying, yeah, politicians don't actually read more than 2 pages. But something I learned was that you can do a Q thing on the document, which leads you into the more scientific evidence, if you like. So the entry point often, as the presenters have indicated, is something short, simple and succinct. And then you move on to the layered complexities, which I think came out very well in the presentation we heard today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that links very nicely onto the question that was sent in for Ruth, Professor Hunter. So I think it was that the evidence that you have presented, we're always asked for evidence and where is the evidence? And I think SPACE has really considered the audiences that will be using the findings of the research. So in terms of that evidence gap map that you presented, is it available or how can people access it?
Yeah, thanks. So this is very much a work in progress that Mike and our team has been leading on. So we have a preliminary map available and we hope that in the autumn time we can make that publicly available. But if anyone's interested in finding out more, drop us an email and we can provide further information. We've done a few of these for different topics, and our various partners really like them because it makes a lot of dense scientific evidence kind of very searchable in a very interactive dashboard. So we've had some really nice feedback about the use of this tool, this evidence gap map, to help really support different types of evidence, briefs, funding applications, etc. from partners. So yeah, we'll have it autumn time, but it should be publicly available.
Fantastic. And I think it again, very timely, again, you know, a lot of our work in terms of the work that we're taking forward on greening, it's looking at what is the evidence, how do you bring together health and the environment sectors. And I think this is really considered those I suppose the skills and abilities that are needed to identify those sources and translate them into a really clear and usable format. So I very much welcome the availability of that. And then another comment had been just in terms of quality of green space, if there has been any work to identify that within the space project. So when we're talking about green and blue space and the quality of it, in terms of if it's used or usable, is that something you've considered?
Yeah, so this is very much a piece of work that we're in the middle of doing. And so we know that high quality accessible green space is the one that's particularly important for population health benefits. So we're very much building on the work that Outdoor Recreation NI produced last week with their Northern Ireland green space map around accessible green space. So very keen to work with them in terms of layering in this data in terms of accessibility, so that people of all abilities can access these spaces and benefit from these spaces, and also various different aspects of quality. So whether that may be around access issues, different amenities, issues around size, connectivity, all factors that we know are predictors of the health benefits of those.
Thank you. So you've mentioned in terms of further resources, and the recording will be shared, and also contact details and presentations available. So there had been some comments and questions for that. I'll come to AJ. I think your presentation was fascinating, and it has really, you know, whet the appetite for further information on that. So there will be further seminars in the series from September on, and we'll look more in depth at certainly the work that you presented today. One of the comments from participant Anne Murray had said that it was fascinating, and I'm beginning to understand as an older person something about our biological inheritance and the interplay with the environment. Is there, I suppose, something key from the research that we can hope to hear more about in a further webinar? Or something unexpected that you're finding?
Yeah, so I think the things that we weren't so much expecting to find was the resilience factors. So we knew things like noise pollution and light pollution have negative impacts on health, but actually we're beginning to understand that some people have these resilience or protective factors that even when they're faced with the same exposure, they don't have the same negative health consequences. And you know, we're really keen to tease those out and see, is there some sort of therapy or intervention, or how can we make those benefits available to the rest of the community? Because sometimes you just can't get rid of the airport that's right next door to your house. So is there something else you can do to ameliorate or mitigate that negative impact?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's amazing. And fascinating that this element is within you know, a project that considers the environment. You're thinking about also your biological makeup within those learned responses, or those the resilience that you have at different times, and why. Yeah, fascinating. We'll definitely look forward to the webinar that's coming. Professor McKinley, I think that leads very nicely onto the comment in terms of your presentation, and it was I think a general comment from Sue Christie. Thank you. It was the presentations were fantastic to see the data and how it shows the impacts on our health of environmental factors. We've known it, but this shows it. It's brilliant for arguing greater public and political action to protect the environment of our people. So in terms of your research, I thought it was fascinating that broadly space is looking at you know, where we are living today and how we live. But your element certainly considers the history of our city and what our soil tells us. And while we present solutions in terms of, I suppose I was fascinated by the brake pads and the heavy metal exposure. Again, it's something, it presents a question of, okay, we're doing this, but how could we do it better? So in terms of that analysis of your work, especially with the soil analysis, is there something, I suppose, similar? Is there something expected or unexpected that's coming from the research that you're leading, and how that informs certainly the captive audience, the cities across the Healthy Cities Network, and largely the work, the other elements of work that you mentioned, like Up 2030, and the other projects that you're involved in across Belfast?
Yeah, no, thank you, Anne. I mean, I think it's completely right. Some of these things we have known, but it's providing the evidence for. I mean, as you mentioned, one of the things that's coming out is obviously the impact on social and economic deprivation. Even road networks, you know, when you look at the spatial distribution of them, and then when we do the analysis, unfortunately, it is coming out that where you live in terms of your social deprivation indices does have an impact. So that sort of thing is, again, it's we knew it, we know it, but providing evidence so that we can actually implement it into policy. I think maybe I suppose the interesting and exciting thing for me in this is linking the environmental work, and we've been linking it and the evidence in soils, as you say, from historical. So even if it's, we now no longer have, you know, the historical industries that we used to have, we still have the legacy of those in our soils. That has an impact in our community gardens if we want to have nature-based solutions. So how do we implement and not necessarily grow in the soil or urban soil, but have raised beds? But I think the exciting thing about space is it allows us, it will allow us to link to our NICLA cohort and then link through to the work that AJ is doing in terms of those epigenetics and the biological markers. So can we really tease that out more? So I think for me, that's really exciting. So there's things that we know, we have known or thought we knew, but now we have the evidence for, and hopefully we'll have more evidence for to implement into policy to help people, everybody right across sort of the different cities.
And I think it really will challenge how we think about things as we go forward, because there are certain elements of space that, whether it's your area of expertise or your skills and knowledge, that you may not have considered, and they're so crucial in terms of that partnership approach to doing work. And I think when you were speaking, it reminded me of the example that Jeff gave in terms of how pharmacies and pharmacy services were provided in Udine, the city in northern Italy, when they looked at where older people live and their proximity to pharmacies and being able to walk to them. It allowed them to plan them across the city in a really strategic way. And your example then of the work that's being done around greening in Belfast and considering the development of further food gardens, where are the most appropriate places to have them, and how do we provide them in a way that considers the elements of the research? Jeff, you have your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Really, it was a question for you and Ruth, probably. So we know that research is often relatively well funded via the ESRC. And we know that local authorities are often underfunded these days with cuts. So it's very good to make those connections. But I just wonder, are you the mediator, do you see it, Anne, between the bridge between the policy and the evidence? I mean, the evidence is really brilliant. But let's take I've visited, as you know, Belfast a number of times. I see it threaded through with roads and motorways. And from the evidence that we've learned today, this results in air pollution of one kind or another. Where do you get the traction? How do you influence the policymakers, which you could say are informed by highway engineers and others, how do we get the evidence into the political domain? Are you the person that does it? And Ruth, maybe you have a role.
Yeah, I think very much. I mean, that would be one of our key roles as a partner within this project, and generally as a member of the WHO Healthy Cities Network, is to highlight those emerging public health needs. And also within this work, it would be that knowledge transfer. So with our networks and identifying key partners and audiences that could use the evidence and measure the impact of that. But I think, you know, Queen's have a long history of doing that anyway, and we're a glad partner. And you can see the makeup of certainly this project in terms of the voice of older people, the wide range of partners involved within Queen's, the different departments. And then also on the website, the Space Project, it lists a range of partners, both statutory and other sectors, private and community and voluntary. So there is a wide range there. Is it our role? Absolutely, certainly that's one of the key roles that we like to do in terms of maximising learning from WHO and providing that link to the city. But it's a city project, and you're right that the budgets are facing extreme pressure as never before, and I think that this is something that certainly the current climate and when our government resumes, it's on the agenda, and it's always providing the evidence, and that civic preparedness or that civic empowerment is a key part of that as well. So I think this project has provided evidence at many levels and audiences to try to get that on the agenda and have that conversation. But I think brain health generally is not something we mention day to day. So this is really important to say, why should we? How do we? And what is the benefit and the lasting impact for it? And certainly Ruth contribute there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. I mean, I think, Belfast Healthy Cities have been fantastic in helping us make those connections and that transfer of the research into it being useful. Let's put it that way. But I think a lot of it is about building relationships with the practitioners and the policymakers and the local communities and the various advocates, etc. So I think that's part of it. And I mean, I love working in Belfast because we're so small, we know everybody. So it's easy to build those relationships and we see each other all the time at various different events and venues. So it's a nice way to just keep conversations going and just be on top of what's needed. And that's how I think we try and approach our research, particularly with the Space Project, going, well, how can we be useful to policy and practice? And that's really helped shape some of the kind of policy practice and some of the videos and fact sheets as well, about distilling lots of research and sometimes years of research into actually very usable formats.
Ruth, I don't hold the floor at all, but clearly you relate to a range of networks and organisations, and you've got the Seniors Advisory Group, which is brilliant. But for example, you talk to the highway engineers who are instrumental in more and more roads and the kind of domination of Belfast, as in other cities, by a road network which they think promotes growth and economic well-being. Whereas I think we would share a view that economic and social well-being is generated in different ways. I mean, clearly you've got to have an economy, but actually the life and flourishing of a city depends on other things. I mean, I'm not wanting to impose a role upon you, but just I'm interested to know whether you bridge across to those people.
Yeah, we do. I was actually at an event on Wednesday where I was talking to the director of transport modelling in the Department for Infrastructure here in Northern Ireland, So we're going to have a further conversation and workshop in August, talking very much about this work and how this can help support their next transport infrastructure work and plan that's going to be launched in August. So we do have those, and I think a lot of it comes back to Northern Ireland and Belfast and having those relationships and being able to have those conversations. And I do think there's a real willingness here as well from a whole range of different organisations to work together and collaborate and form those partnerships. So we're in a very lucky position, I think.
Thank you, and thank you, Ruth. Thank you, sorry, Anne.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. That was great. I know we have run over, but I was really keen just to finally say to Dr. Niamh O'Kane and Dr. Ione Alva Palencia about the fact sheets and the videos. Where can they be accessed? I know they are right across, and the themes are right across the space project. How can we access them, or where are they available?
Yeah, I'll field this. Thanks, Ione. So we have them now live on our website, on the Space website. So hopefully I can pop into the chat maybe the link to the Space website. So feel very free to go on there today or whenever you have the time to watch the videos. Do feel free to download and share the fact sheets as well. We're really keen for them to be seen as far and wide as possible, but I think it's also a wider conversation about how we can take the next steps and what we can do with these videos and fact sheets to make sure that they're in the public realm and that everybody can access them and knows how to.
And they align very well. I mean, when you watch the videos, you see very much all participants in the research credited within the fact sheets as well, which is lovely to see the voice of older people informing so clearly the work that's being done. Ione, was there something that you had wanted to say? No, fine, okay. And Jenny, was there a comment that you wanted to make? You had your hand up there.
It was really just to, I suppose, I see Roy's comment about, older people relying on cars. And I actually think this is really important because, obviously within space, we're very aware of isolation, the impact of isolation. And but I think it's why integrating everything is so important. So for example, can we use nature, such as trees, to baffle the sound of noise in roads? Can we actually use vegetation again, like trees, to actually be that barrier for pollutants, for the traffic pollution? So it's not, that's why it's so important that Ruth and we're all working with the Department of Infrastructure. Roads, transport networks are not bad. It's how we mitigate against the bad impacts of those. But I really take on board what Roy has said, in that isolation is a a key factor that we're also very aware of in terms of our aging population and many others. So I think it's working together, and that's why it's so crucial that this project is able to be funded.
Fantastic, and a really nice point to finish on as well. So thank you so much for your fascinating presentations and for joining us here today. And thank you for staying the additional time because I know we were due to finish at 11:30, but the discussion and the question and answer session was really a key part of it as well. To all the participants, thank you for joining, for taking the time. And I'm sure, like me, you've been fascinated by the presentations and keen to hear more. So in terms of the resources and the fact sheets that were launched today, they are available on Queen's University Space website page. The recording and the presentations will be sent out early next week. And if you have any questions at all, please get in touch. Thank you and goodbye.